Did you know that some of the most horrifying war crimes of World War II have been deliberately suppressed, covered up, or forgotten? While certain atrocities are widely acknowledged, others have remained in the shadows, erased from history books, or downplayed due to political and diplomatic sensitivities. The brutal reality of the war extended far beyond the well-known horrors of the Holocaust. The Pacific and Asian theaters of the war saw unimaginable cruelty, mass killings, and human experimentation that rivaled the worst acts of the 20th century. This video will shed light on these hidden atrocities, exposing the darkest moments of World War II that the world is trying to forget. If you think you know the full story of the war, you might be shocked by some of these revelations. Unit 731. Japan's Nightmare Biological Warfare Program. Few war crimes in history match the sheer horror of Unit 731, a secretive Japanese military unit dedicated to the development of biological and chemical weapons through human experimentation. Established by the Imperial Japanese Army in 1932 and led by General Shiro Ishii, Unit 731 operated primarily in occupied China, where its scientists conducted some of the most grotesque medical experiments imaginable. The victims, primarily Chinese civilians, along with Koreans, Mongolians, and even Allied prisoners of war, were subjected to unimaginable suffering, all in the name of advancing Japan's biological warfare capabilities. Men, women, and even children were deliberately infected with deadly diseases such as the bubonic plague, anthrax, and cholera. The goal was to observe how the infections progressed and to test potential treatments, but there was no real intention of curing these test subjects. Rather, the Japanese researchers wanted to watch them die in agony. Many were dissected while still alive, often without anesthesia, so doctors could observe the direct effects of disease on human organs. Others were exposed to frostbite in freezing temperatures, their limbs dipped into ice-cold water until solid, only to be smashed with hammers to study how the human body responded to extreme cold. Unit 731 didn't stop at laboratory experiments. Japan actively used biological weapons against enemy populations, including releasing plague-infested fleas into Chinese villages. This resulted in deadly outbreaks that killed tens of thousands. The unit even conducted bomb tests using live human subjects, tying prisoners to wooden stakes in open fields before detonating explosives to study the effects. The Bataan Death March, a trail of suffering and death. In April 1942, after the fall of Bataan in the Philippines, one of the most brutal war crimes of the Pacific Theater unfolded, the Bataan Death March. When Japanese forces captured over 75,000 American and Filipino soldiers, they'd forced them to march more than 65 miles under the scorching tropical sun. What should have been a simple prisoner transfer became a deliberate act of cruelty designed to break the spirit of the captured soldiers. Weak from months of combat, starvation, and disease, many prisoners collapsed along the way. The Japanese guards showed no mercy. Any soldier who fell behind or stumbled was executed on the spot, often by bayonet, beheading, or being run over by trucks. Prisoners were denied food and water, and those desperate enough to drink from roadside puddles were sometimes shot for their disobedience. Others, driven mad by thirst, tried to drink from the stagnant, disease-infested ditches, only to vomit and collapse in agony moments later. Some guards took sadistic pleasure in tormenting their captives. They'd force prisoners to stand in the sun for hours without rest, a punishment known as sun treatment, which led to severe dehydration, heat stroke, and in many cases, death. Survivors later recalled the unbearable thirst, describing how they resorted to drinking their own urine or chewing on leaves just to stay alive. Even for those who survived the march, the nightmare was far from over. The prisoners were packed into suffocating boxcars and transported to prison camps, where starvation, forced labor, and disease killed thousands more. The Bataan Death March remains one of the most horrifying examples of the inhumane treatment of prisoners of war in World War II. The Manila Massacre, the forgotten slaughter of civilians. As World War II neared its end, Japanese forces in the Philippines carried out one of the deadliest massacres in the Pacific, the systematic slaughter of over 100,000 civilians in Manila. In February 1945, as American forces launched a campaign to liberate the city, Japanese troops, under orders from their commanders, turned their guns on innocent men, women, and children. Entire families were dragged from their homes and executed in the streets. Churches and hospitals, where civilians sought refuge, became slaughterhouses as Japanese troops set buildings on fire, throwing grenades into rooms packed with desperate people. Women and young girls were subjected to unspeakable sexual violence before being brutally murdered. Infants were tossed into the air and impaled on bayonets. The destruction of Manila left the city in ruins, and its people traumatized for generations. Yet this massacre is rarely mentioned in mainstream World War II narratives, buried beneath the stories of European battles and political treaties. Comfort women. The tragic exploitation of thousands. One of the most harrowing war crimes of World War II was the systematic sexual slavery imposed by the Japanese military on tens of thousands of women from Korea, China, the Philippines, Indonesia, and other occupied territories. These women, euphemistically referred to as comfort women, were forcibly taken from their homes and placed in military-run brothels, where they endured repeated rape and physical abuse at the hands of Japanese soldiers. Many were teenage girls, tricked with false promises of jobs, only to be trapped in a nightmare of sexual violence. They were subjected to medical experiments, denied basic hygiene, and often discarded when they became too sick or injured to serve the soldiers. Some were murdered to cover up the atrocities, while others took their own lives to escape the relentless torment. Even after the war, these women faced stigma and were often silenced by their own governments, who wanted to maintain diplomatic ties with Japan. Decades later, survivors continue to demand recognition and justice, but the Japanese government has repeatedly denied full responsibility for these war crimes, fueling ongoing tensions in East Asia. The Bengal famine, Britain's deadly neglect. While much of the focus on World War II war crimes centers on the Axis powers, the British Empire was also responsible for atrocities that led to the deaths of millions. The Bengal famine of 1943 was one of the most devastating and preventable tragedies of the war. Under British colonial rule, food shortages in Bengal, India, spiraled into a full-scale famine due to deliberate government policies. While millions of Indians starved, British authorities continued exporting rice and other resources to fuel the war effort, dismissing the crisis as an unfortunate but unavoidable consequence of war. The famine claimed the lives of an estimated 3 million people, many of whom died in the streets, too weak to even beg for food. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, often celebrated as a hero of the war, showed complete indifference, blaming the famine on the fecklessness of the Indian people. His government refused to divert ships carrying grain from Australia, despite desperate pleas for aid. The horrific starvation of millions remains one of the darkest stains on Britain's wartime legacy. So guys, let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. For more interesting content, give this video a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. For more awesome content, have a nice day, and I will see you in the next video.